calling out and believing the best about someone is good, except when their actions are begging you not to believe the best about them. And then in order to continue to believe the best about them, you either have to keep secrets or you have to lie to yourself. And so, all of those positive qualities, when planted in the soil of a toxic environment, become dysfunctional because they can be taken to an extreme that's not healthy. Look, Jesus modeled for us that we are to lay down our life. And he did. He laid down his life for others. He laid down his life for us. But we must always remember, Jesus laid down his life to accomplish a high and holy purpose. Jesus did not lay down his life to enable bad behavior to continue.
I want to start here. Take me back to the night you knew the end of that marriage was near. What happened, to the extent you're comfortable?
Yeah, so basically, I knew, I guess I'd been doing this long enough that I knew the signs of certain patterns. And, there's a big difference between a mistake and a pattern of behavior. And when the patterns started, I knew where the patterns led to. And so it was, I had laid down some very healthy boundaries, and those boundaries were for the sake of establishing a healthy marriage. And when those boundaries were crossed, it really wasn't a mystery at that point what would happen. So it's kind of like, when you establish healthy boundaries, there also has to be a consequence. And so there was already a system set in place. And so the consequence was the natural response. And look, I had been in this dynamic for many years. I mean, from 2016, it was like 5 years. So it was a very long time. And so in the end, I did not walk away from my marriage. I chose to accept a very painful reality. And the last year, I decided to remove any influence of me from his life, and then just let it go, because I had tried so hard for so long to work on the marriage, and I just needed to see what would he choose if I removed my hands of influence. And so the state of North Carolina requires that you separate a year and a day. And so during that year, I just, like I said, removed my influence. And at the end of that year, I got the clarity I needed. It was not the clarity I wanted, but it was the clarity I needed.
A lot of folks are hanging out with us today who are entrenched in relationships. We talk about relationships and communication through the lens of mental health and emotional health here on the show. And I'd love for you to double down on patterns versus mistakes. That's really intriguing. What are the dynamics and perhaps the markers that would identify a mistake versus a pattern, so that folks listening can draw a line and say, oh, I didn't realize actually that's a pattern that would lead to XYZ?
Yeah, so we all make mistakes, and that's a good, when we make a mistake, it's a good time to have someone exercise grace with us. Certainly the Lord exercises grace, but when there's a mistake, there should be a soft heart, a humble heart, where we fully own the mistake that we made. And then it's much easier for reconciliation to take place. And so, we all make mistakes, and mistakes we can give grace for that. What I mean when I say a pattern of behavior, I mean when there are choices that are being made, and they're made over and over and over and over. So, the repetitive nature of that is, it's no longer a mistake once it's repeated over and over and over, because then it becomes a pattern. It's an operating system. It's the natural way that that person is operating. And we really have to pay attention to patterns, because patterns that lean in the direction of relationship destruction should not be tidied up or covered over. They need to be brought forth. And a lot of the issue that I would often have is I would minimize what should have been very concerning, and I would maximize certain crumbs of hope and healing. And that was something I needed to own. That was something I needed to work on. Nothing I did justified the behaviors of my ex-spouse, but certainly I contributed in the dysfunction of the relationship because I was a very codependent enabler. And so codependency means like, I need you to be okay so I can feel okay. So how can we make you okay? Because I want to be okay, okay? And enabling is often when you catch the the situation before someone can hit a place of consequence. And there were seemingly noble reasons I was doing both of these things. But in the end, I had to get a professional involved. I had to get a therapist involved that was trained in betrayal trauma and trained in helping me recognize patterns, helping me establish healthy boundaries, helping me to have the emotional fortitude and the biblical confidence to hold fast to my boundaries. And like I said, in the end, I didn't walk away. I just accepted a very painful reality.
Teach us really how to identify maybe blind spots in our own lives when we're, as you said in your story, minimizing the wrong things, maximizing the wrong things, maybe connected to even when noble things become dysfunctional. How do we navigate that, Lysa?
Well, I can only speak from my experience, so I'll just use myself as the example. And, there are certain positive qualities that I have. One is I tend to believe the best in people. I tend to trust very quickly. I tend to want to call forth very positive things, and I tend to want to avoid parking my brain on the negative things. So all of those things are good qualities, right? They're really good qualities, except when taken to an extreme. And when taken to an extreme, positivity can turn into denial. Um, and, calling out and believing the best about someone is good, except when their actions are begging you not to believe the best about them. And then, in order to continue to believe the best about them, you either have to keep secrets or you have to lie to yourself. And so, all of those positive qualities, when planted in the soil of a toxic environment,
Wow,
become
Lysa.
dysfunctional
Yes.
because they can be taken to an extreme that's not healthy.
Is there anything else we need to know about why patterns should not be tidied up? You said that moments ago, and I was really fascinated by that because I think, well, it's easy for me to, in the name of discipleship and Christendom, to unintentionally enable patterns and say, well, the Lord's just working with them or whatever. But I'm really struck by that, and I want to mature in that, at least in my own life, and I know everyone with us today would want to do the same, Lysa. Patterns are not to be tidied up. They're to be brought into the light, is what I think you said. Anything
Yeah.
else you want to say?
Yeah, I would say, part of my Christian journey is that I very much loved peace and I wanted peace in every situation. And I felt like that was a good demonstration of the fruit of the Spirit. Like the Spirit, evidence of the Spirit in me is that, I like peace in my dynamics. And that's, again, a really good quality, except when you want peace so much that you're kind of living in denial of things that if you confront those things, it will disrupt the peace. So, that was a big part of it. And mental health is a commitment to reality at all cost, at all cost. So there is a cost when you confront because there's a disruption of peace usually. And so, that was something that again, I had to work on. Look, Jesus modeled for us that we are to lay down our life. And he did. He laid down his life for others. He laid down his life for us. But we must always remember Jesus laid down his life to accomplish a high and holy purpose. Jesus did not lay down his life to enable bad behavior to continue.
Lysa, wow. Just curious about this. Walk me through maybe the emotional maze of navigating through pain, the pain of betrayal, with the reflex of then wanting your then husband with you as a rock. If a person is with someone as a rock, as a strong tower, so to speak, and then that person is the perpetrator in a relationship, I think that could cause confusion. You want to walk me through the navigation of that in your own life? You know, he was a rock for you, and yet when you are in the height of pain and despair, the neurobiological reflex is, where is he? And yet he's the perpetrator. How do you sort that out?
Yeah, well, at the time, I definitely would not have referred to him as the perpetrator. I didn't even have that kind of language that seemed kind of severe. And I wasn't, I never wanted him to be the villain of the story. I didn't. I wanted him to be the hero of the story. That's what I wanted. So it was only natural, when I would draw boundaries, they were healthy boundaries, and then they would be crossed. And then, I didn't want to, I didn't want to carry forth the consequence, because the consequence not only affected him, but it affected me too. And so that became really hard. But the more I dishonored my own boundary by not implementing very reasonable, healthy consequences. And when I say consequences, I don't mean that I'm punishing him. I mean, for too long, I prevented natural consequences. So we're just talking about natural consequences of decisions that were being made. And so when that would happen, I was reinforcing that I really wasn't serious about these healthy boundaries. And so it was really crucial for me to, again, have the help of my therapist to see what I needed to see, to admit to myself what I was really experiencing. And that was really important. And navigating the maze, I don't think that I'm an expert at that. What I can say is I loved having a person. And then when I was going through the hardest season of my entire life, I didn't have my person. And so it's easy sometimes when I would get lonely to want to call him and to reach out to him or to text him. And there was a temporary moment of thrill when I felt like he responded and he's saying the right things and all of that. But it was always very temporary, because, it was not, he had already established that he was not my safe person anymore. And so it took me a long time to understand that and to make peace with that. And so, when I say I didn't walk away, I accepted a very painful reality. That's what I mean. I had to accept the reality that my safe person could not be him any longer.
You had used the phrase dishonoring your own boundaries. Teach that out for folks. What does that look like? How do we spot that in our own lives?
So, as a Christian, I had a really hard time with boundaries because I didn't have the confidence that God was okay with boundaries. And so, because in boundaries sometimes can be used inappropriately. They can be used as a manipulation tool, a control tactic, a way to punish someone else. And when spoken out of anger, they can be very bombastic and unrealistic consequences that are massive and all of this stuff. So I wanted to have a healthy view of boundaries, but my ultimate question was, is God okay? And so I opened up the Bible and I started studying boundaries in the Bible. And one of my most fascinating places that I studied is when God established the temple. So God established the temple, giving certain people certain access, but not all people all access. And the greater the access someone was given, the greater responsibility they had to demonstrate, and the greater the consequence was if they did not hold up their responsibility. All the way to the high priest, he was given the greatest access in the Holy of Holies once a year to make atonement for the people. But if his responsibility was he had to be absolutely purified and cleansed, and if he was not responsible with that, then he suffered the greatest consequence. He would drop dead. So I started paying attention to those two words, access and responsibility. And I realized, to the level that we give someone access to us is to the level they need to be responsible with that access. My problem is I was giving level 10 access to someone who was only demonstrating like level 2 or 3 responsibility. And the distance between those, that's where dysfunction is. That's where the chaos is. And where there's chaos, there's a lack of a needed boundary. Now, I could try to have a conversation and ask him to be more responsible. But if this person is unwilling or incapable of making the necessary changes to increase their responsibility, then it doesn't matter. Like, I cannot force them to change. So at that point, I don't put a boundary on them. I put a boundary on myself by reducing the access that I grant down to their demonstrated level of responsibility. So that's what I mean when I say, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to pay attention and we have to hold ourselves accountable. God never called us to control other people, but he did call us to self-control. And the quickest way to spin out of control is when you're wanting to control another person and you can't. And so that's when it runs the potential to turn us into someone we were never meant to be, trying to force another person to change. We need to let them have their journey, but we can respond to their journey by reducing the access that we grant them down to their demonstrated level of responsibility. And to do that, it requires us to put a boundary on ourselves. Only we understand our limitations. Like, I understand my limitations. And when I say access, that means access to my areas of limited capacity. And I'm unlimited because I'm human. Now, of course, I always want to make sure I'm not being selfish, but for me to act limitless, for me to act like I have all the emotional capacity in the world, all the financial capacity in the world, and that I can be all things to all people, basically that's me saying I'm limitless like God. And I'm not God. I'm not limitless. I'm limited because I'm human.
This is really, really a brilliant case study. So for folks hanging out with us, what I hear you saying in a way, Lysa, is setting a boundary isn't saying you can't do that. Setting a boundary, rather, is saying you're going to do what you're going to do, and if you do, here's how I'm going to respond.
Yeah, so boundaries seem scary at first, but they're
Right.
really just a communication tool. This
Yes.
is what I will and will not tolerate. This is what is and is not okay. This is what I will and will not accept, or I will and will not do. And so it's just a way to establish in a relationship what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And sometimes when you've been in a dysfunctional relationship, because there's been a lack of boundaries, some of that communication has not yet been established. And when we go to establish that communication of what we will and will not tolerate, what we will and will not accept, what we do and do not have to give, when we go to establish that, healthy people respect healthy boundaries. An unhealthy person has never met a boundary that they liked. So that's often where you're going to get pushback. And that's often where you have to be prepared to follow through on the consequence. So let's give another example, because, it's about to be the holidays. Let's say it's about to be the holidays, right? And let's just say Uncle Joe is coming to the holidays. Now, if you have an Uncle Joe and you're listening, I'm not talking about your Uncle Joe, okay? I'm just hypothetically using an
Sure.
Uncle.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So let's say Uncle Joe is coming to Thanksgiving, and Uncle Joe loves to bring up politically divisive topics. And you have already recognized in yourself that when he does that, it tips you over your emotional capacity and sometimes puts you in a position where the worst of you suddenly comes out. And you do not want to lose it at the Thanksgiving table. You've worked so hard. You want to establish this beautiful dinner of connection and fun and family and all of that. So you can ask Uncle Joe, like, hey, Uncle Joe, I want to honor that you study this, that you're passionate about it. I am making a request. I'm requesting that you not bring up politically divisive topics at the Thanksgiving table. Now, obviously, you're a grown adult and you're going to make your own choices. So I'm just going to, out of respect, tell you ahead of time, if you do choose to bring up politically divisive topics, I will excuse myself from the table. And I will go in the kitchen and I'm not going to make a show of it. I'm not going to disrespect you in any way. I will go work on dessert. I'll go wash some dishes. Now, remember, that's going to cost me something because I want to stay at the table. I want Uncle Joe to not talk about this, but I cannot control him. So I can make a request of him, but then if he violates my boundary, I've already got a protocol. I know what to do. I've decided in advance. I've already pre-decided exactly what I will do if Uncle Joe does that. Now, why am I doing that? Is it because I'm selfish? Is it because I'm disrespectful? No, not at all. It's because I don't want to lay in bed that night fretting over the heated conversation that I got sucked into at the Thanksgiving table that made me feel like the worst of me came front and center in a moment where I was not prepared to know what to do, and I got emotional. And so, my responsibility, again, God never calls us to control another person, but he does say a fruit of his spirit in us is that we remain self-controlled.
You used a word that I love, and it's pre-decide. Teach us about the power of pre-decisions.
Yeah, one of those pre-decisions I choose to make every day is when I wake up in the morning, I pray this prayer. God, I want to see you. God, I want to hear you. God, I want to know you. God, I want to follow hard after you. And before my feet even hit the floor today, I say yes to you. And then I go through a process of establishing in my prayer, God, you are good to me, and you are good at being God. Therefore, I'm safe enough, even though I'm presenting all these prayer requests to you, I'm safe enough to trade my will for thy will because I'm so confident you will. Then the last part of the prayer is this. Now today, Lord, show me someone to bless, show me someone to forgive, and show me rich evidence of your goodness and faithfulness all around me, and I will notice it and I'll call it out. So every single day, I've already pre-decided when I get up from my prayer that I have invited the divine God of the universe to participate, do life with me, and that I'm going to recognize it. And every single day, that's a prayer that God answers. Every single day, God brings across my path someone who needs a little bit of my time, a little bit of my encouragement, a little bit, maybe even of my money. I've already pre-decided that I'm going to look for that person. So it's not this angst inside of me, do I have time? No, I will make time for this person, and I will do for one what I wish I could do for everyone. But this person that crossed my path, I already pre-decided that I will pause and I will help them. I will do something for them. That doesn't mean that I have to spend hours and hours and hours, but it means I'm not going to rush past them. The second thing, I've already pre-decided that there is going to be someone who offends me today. Chances are there is. And when I meet that person, I have already pre-forgiven that person. So now when they bump into my happy, I'm like, oh, you're the person that I already pre-forgave this morning. Just because you laid down an offense does not mean I have to pick it up, carry it with me, and let it ruin my day. So I've already pre-forgiven you. And so you do you. And I'm not going to let their poor actions or reactions ruin my day or affect my mood. And it's just a way for me to establish ahead of time who I want to be and what fruit I want to demonstrate. I want to be a person of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Like I want to be that. Therefore, I have to choose it.
I want to go right to a quote from you, Lysa. Struck me. It's a fool's game to drink the poison someone keeps giving you and hope that there are enough other good aspects in your relationship that you'll survive it. Man, that hits me between the eyes, Lysa. Teach that out.
Yeah. So when you're in a relationship, sometimes for the sake of, again, keeping the peace in the relationship, there's things that need to be discussed. There's things that need to be confronted. But instead of us disrupting the peace and confronting those things or talking about those things, we just swallow it down. And we just swallow it down and swallow it down and swallow it down and swallow it down. And eventually, all that undiscussed angst, all of that frustration, it grows. And when it grows, it's like that we're drinking poison and hoping that the other aspects of this relationship are so terrific that it'll somehow negate or neutralize all of this stuff in here. And maybe that will work for you. It doesn't work for me, because what happens is there's never just a little bit of unattended to anger. Anger grows. There's never just a little tiny bit of unattended to bitterness. Bitterness grows. And those things don't want to just be a feeling, they want to be a consuming feeling. And I think one of the number one killers of relationships today are simmering resentments. It's those things that needed to be talked about, but just never were. And so I think it's important that we recognize those in real time and try to keep a very short account. Don't let those simmering resentments build up inside of you, because that is a real relationship killer.
I want to talk about gaslighting and emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse. What were the earliest signs in your life, Lysa, that the truth was being manipulated, you were being manipulated, and really that the reality that was being projected to you was being rewritten and even manipulated itself?
Yeah, well, let's make it general, because, some of that was part of my journey. And yet
Sure.
I recognize that it's a lot of people's journey, Gaslighting is where something is true, but you're told it's not true. And it creates within you this crazy making effect, especially if it's a person that you want to trust, especially it's a person that you thought and have a history that they have your best interest in mind. And so you want to believe what they're saying is true, and yet you have this uneasy feeling because it seems not true. And you start to question, did I really hear that? Did I really see that? Am I the crazy one? And anytime you are in a relationship and you start asking yourself, am I crazy? That is a massive red flag that needs to be tended to. Immediately, you need to have a wise person that can help you recognize what you're experiencing. For me, that was a trauma therapist, Jim Cress. It was very, very important for him. And probably the first year that I did therapy with Jim, the number one question, I would sit down every week and I would say, are you sure? Are you sure that I'm not crazy? Are you sure I haven't snowed you? Are you sure, Jim? Like, are you sure maybe I'm the real issue here. Maybe I'm the real problem. And Jim would often say to me, he's like, Lysa, just the fact that you're asking those questions and you genuinely want help lets me know that you're not what you fear. Now, let's talk about and unpack, what are you seeing? What are you experiencing? What's hitting your radar that you have minimized or lied to yourself about? And look, there were real things that I was seeing. There were real things that I was hearing. There were real things I was experiencing. And when you're told over and over and over, you didn't see that, you didn't hear that, that's not what you experienced, it can really start to mess with your mind. And that's really what was happening to me.
How do you move forward after divorce without projecting that past pain onto the future?
Well, sometimes you are going to project past pain onto your future. So, I think that's, you're going to get triggered in your past pain, especially if the trauma was pretty significant. You just have to know what to do with those triggers. But it is important for me. I'll just talk about my experience. For me, it was very important that I tend well to my healing before I jumped into another relationship. When I first got divorced, I couldn't even fathom dating someone, so that was not hard at first. But as the years went by, I decided that I could potentially see a future with someone else. But what my counselor cautioned me with is Jim would often say, Lysa, your picker is broken, so we have to work on that. And what he meant by that is dysfunction and toxicity had become what I was used to. And if I did not do the hard work of working on myself, then I would be drawn to what felt normal to me, and dysfunction felt normal at that point. And I didn't want to attract the same issues that I had just escaped from. And so it was important that I give that time and that I work on my issues. And also, I did not want to need another person to help me get healthy. I didn't want to need another person to ease the ache of my loneliness, because loneliness was part of the process of healing. I had to learn to sit alone with my own thoughts and be okay. I wanted to be healed enough to where I could want the right person. And we'll compromise. If we need someone to help us heal, we will compromise. And look, we will attract someone at the same level of health that we are. That's just how it works. And so if you want to attract someone healthy, you need to get healthy.
Lysa, that was worth the price of admission right there. I mean, you just really added value to folks who are in relationships today. But I want to go back to something Jim said to you. He said, quote, "Your picker is broken." I want you to talk to people listening today whose picker is broken. How do they navigate dating, engagement, marriage, especially if they've experienced betrayal in past relationships that they thought were going somewhere? I'm just intrigued by that phrase, your picker is broken. How do we fix it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say I'm not accusing anyone else of having this issue. I had this issue. And so, I'm just pointing the finger at me here. But
mine was broken too, Lysa. Mine was broken too. So I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said before, what felt normal to me was dysfunction. That felt normal.
Yeah.
Because I'd lived in it and navigated around it so long. And if I wanted to not attract another dysfunctional relationship, then I had to get healthy enough to reestablish what normal should be, so that I would be attracted to the right qualities, the right kind of relationship, the right kind of dynamics, the right kind of man, And so that's what Jim meant, that I didn't want to go round two with the same issues. I wanted to make sure that I chose more wisely, because, when you know better, you do better. So when you know better, do better.
We talked about patterns versus mistakes earlier in the conversations, but let's just sort of hone in on this. What actually breaks a marriage beyond repair? In other words, the difference between a difficult marriage and a destructive marriage or relationship.
Yeah, well, my friend Leslie Vernick is the one that taught me this, and so I always want to give credit where credit is due. She's brilliant. She's written a whole book on the emotionally destructive relationship, so that helped me a lot. But Leslie helped me understand and separate out, look, every relationship is going to have difficulties. You throw two sinners together and say, do life together, manage finances, raise kids. Of course, there are going to be difficulties, and difficulties are good reasons to get counseling, go to conferences, read books. So, a marriage that has difficulties, fight for that marriage. I'm not pro-divorce at all. I am pro-healthy marriage. And I would say fight for that marriage, fight for it, get through those difficulties, let them work for you instead of always against you, all of that. But when we're talking about a destructive marriage, that's a whole nother beast. You see, inside of a relationship, each person is supposed to seek the other person's highest good. And when one person is doing that, but the other person has habits, patterns, addictions, abuse that is no longer not only not seeking the other person's highest good, but becoming destructive to another image bearer of Christ, that's very serious. And those destructive patterns, those destructive habits, those destructive addictions, that destructive abuse, that shifts us out of this is just marriage difficulties. This has become a destructive marriage. And that's when you have to get trained professionals involved, because you don't want to try to counsel someone who is in a destructive marriage with the same kind of advice that you counsel someone in a difficult marriage. It's two separate dynamics that you're facing.
You talked about really the early days after the divorce was final and all that. What does it do to a person's body, not only their mind and their soul, to live in that state of prolonged emotional betrayal while you were navigating that? What do people need to understand about trauma at that level?
Well, when I found out about my then husband's betrayal, it was in February. It was the day before my oldest daughter's rehearsal dinner. And so I was simultaneously experiencing one of the highest highs, my daughter getting married, and one of the lowest lows, realizing the unfaithfulness of my then husband. And it was just an implosion emotionally that I can't even describe. And yet, to protect my daughter on this beautiful weekend, I had to put a smile on my face. I had to be normal when I felt anything but. And, sometimes we have to do that in a temporary situation. But what happened with me is 6 weeks later, my next daughter got married. And a few months after that, my son got married. So I was having to smile on the outside while I felt like I was dying on the inside. And to protect my kids, I didn't want to acknowledge or even bring out in a public way what I was facing. So I stuffed all of that hurt and all of that pain and all of that anxiety and trauma down inside of me. And in June of that same year, I woke up one morning, went to step out of my bed, and the pain was so severe, I collapsed onto the floor. And long story short, I had to be rushed into emergency surgery because my colon had ripped away from the abdominal wall, twisted around itself, and cut off the blood flow inside of me. Literally, my brain had already sent a signal to my body to start decomposing from the inside out because the tissue was that dead. And when the surgeon went in, they told my family I probably would not make it through the surgery. But when he went in, your colon, which is supposed to be the, size of like a tube or like a hose or whatever, in that section of my colon, it took the doctor 2 hands to lift it up. It was that massive. And the surgeon took a picture of what that looked like. And he later told me, he said, Lysa, I don't know what you're going through, because at that point I wasn't telling anyone. I don't know what you're going through, but I can tell you the trauma is so severe that I want you to see what emotional trauma can physically do to a body. And I took that picture and I took it to my therapist, Jim, and I said, Jim, help me process this. And he looked at me and he said, Lysa, never again will I tolerate someone saying that emotional trauma does not have serious physical ramifications, because I can see it beyond a shadow of a doubt in your body. I can see the direct link now between emotional trauma and physical realities, and how it affects you. And so, it's not like I framed that picture and put it on my counter, but I let that be a picture in my mind that we shouldn't ever minimize emotional trauma, because it's very, very significant.
What have you as a mom had to model for them while you were harboring turmoil inside your own heart? What have you had to model for them as adults as they step into this new phase of life?
Yeah, well, it was really important for me that my kids have one healthy parent. And it was very, very challenging for me to finally acknowledge that. And so, I think what I wanted my kids to see is, I guess I could say, two things that were absolutely crucial. Number one, I wanted them to see a mom that called out and recognized the reality of what was happening, and that she was courageous enough to make the very painful decision to say no more. That was the first thing. And the second thing is, I wanted my kids to watch someone who was deeply traumatized, deeply wounded, physically, emotionally, psychologically, in every way. And I wanted them to see that Jesus Christ is who he says he is, and that he can absolutely heal if only we will walk through the process of healing. And I wanted them to see a resilient woman. I wanted them to see a woman who stayed committed to her faith, honored God through the hardest season of her life, and who came out on the other side, still loving God, loving her family, and able to function in a way that I have joy for the future. That's what I want to see.
We'll end here today, Lysa. If someone's listening right now and they know they need to leave, but they're terrified they're going to lose everything, what's the last thing you'd say to them?
I would say your fears are real. They're real. And, you do have to count the cost, because you're deciding between hard and hard. But just remember to count the cost. There is a definite cost to leaving, and some of those costs sometimes seem more evident than the cost to staying. But there's a definite cost to staying as well. And I'll never encourage someone to leave. That's a decision that they have to make. I always deeply respected my therapist, because he never looked at me and said, "Lysa, you need to get a divorce." He never did that. And so my point in all the ministry work that I do now is I'm not going to tell someone what to think, but I'm going to give them a lot to think about.
You got a brand new book out. Folks, stay with me. We'll put the links to all of those resources in the show notes at wintoday.tv. But Lysa, anything else today? I really am just thankful for you, for your wisdom and your time. But anything else you'd like to leave with the listeners today? Or even the heartbeat of the book?
Yeah. I would say if you're a friend who is helping someone who's suffering through an unwanted divorce, I would encourage you to get the book and read it alongside your friend. It can be really challenging when we say well-meaning things that to someone who's walking through this are completely devastating. One of those is, there's always two sides to every story. And what I say to that is, this is not a spectator sport. Why are we picking sides? This is a family that's being devastated. Let's jump on the field and let's help what needs to be helped and who needs to be helped that's being destroyed in this process.
Lysa, again, I'm just so thankful to see you again. Thankful for your time. But this has been a sobering, enlivening conversation. So I really appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.